Amen. Okay, now our study this morning is a review. Basically, I've done a study, this study with the Islands of the Seas Ministry, and I would like to review it once again in our study this morning. So the sources which the information or the sources that I had my study been compiled are from a 2019 study from Elder Tess. One was from EDP Juliet, presentation number 7, 2019. The second one is on Portugal, presentation number 15 and presentation number 20 on 2019. And the recent French camp meeting 2022, which is presentation number 1. Now, to begin our study this morning, I would like us to look at the history of Donald Trump. So Donald Trump is born into a wealthy family. He became a real estate developer, and he was interested in politics. And in this history, and in our history, we can see that Donald Trump became president in 2016. Donald Trump became president in 2016, but we can pin him back all the way to 1989. 1989. Now in 2000, we understood that in 2000, he ran for president independently. He was independent in 2000. He didn't want to try out for the major two parties, Democratic or the Republican, but he ran for president in 2000 independently. In 2015 and 2016, the evangelical rallied behind him. Right? We understand that in the history of 2015 to 2016, how the evangelical rallied behind him. Reason, because there was a man that claimed he had a vision from God. So God supposedly told this man, I am going to turn the country around and reform the United States. And God says, I have a trump card. So this man had a vision saying that, telling him that God instructed this man that God is going to reform USA, and saying that he had a trump card. So the concept of trump card, and because of the vision, the evangelical use that in this narrative, creating the Donald Trump as the new Cyrus. So you can see Donald Trump has been over the Time magazine in 16 times. So we know the story about the Time magazine. Time magazine. President Reagan and Pope John Paul, all the way we understood that in our formalization, that there was the Time magazine on the alliance of Reagan, President Reagan, and the alliance of John Paul. Before that, there was an article on George Bush and Reagan. But before all that, in January of 1989, on the Time magazine, January of 1989, Time magazine, the cover was of a picture of Donald Trump. The picture of Donald Trump holding a Trump card, That was in 1989. And it opens with a quotation from Trump saying, "No one has done as much as I've done." This is the quote that was at the Time magazine in January of 1989. So he said, "No one has done as much as I have. I love to have enemies, fight my enemies." Now, all these quotes we are used to hearing now, laid out in 1989. Okay? Now, down the story in this Time magazine in 1989, something about Donald Trump caught the attention of the public, and they symbolize him as a symbol of our age. And people were talking about his political. So we talked about Donald Trump. Donald Trump being elected president in 2016. But we can pin him right back to 1989, time of the end. We know about the Time magazine. President Ronald Reagan and Pope John Paul alliance. But before that, in January, Donald Trump was in the Time magazine cover, holding a Trump card. And in that first few opening of that magazine are three of his quotes. "No one has done as much as I have. I love to have enemies, fight my enemies." Okay? Now, all these quotes that we are used to hearing now had been laid down in January 1918. Okay? So Donald Trump tried in 2004, 2008. Okay? But in these two elections, in the only two elections that he put his name up for nominees was in 2000 and 2016. He considered running in 1989, but what happened in 1989, he made a bad decision concerning buying a casino, and it went bankrupt. If it hadn't for that, he would have run in 1989. So we have two stories concerning the Time magazine in 1989. We have Donald Trump and we have the Holy Alliance. Okay. Now, I want us to look at 2014. We have 2014, 2019, 9/11. Taking us back to two histories. We have the Civil War, which is from 1861 to 1865. 1863 is the midway in calculation using 151, take us all the way to 2014. So we're using these dates originally from the Millerites history. We understood that 9/11 was April, 2014 was July, and 2019 was October 22. And using another history, which is the French Revolution, French Revolution, we have 1789, 1798 to 1799. A midway calculation using 220, which will give us 1794. So in these two histories, we have the French Revolution and we have the Civil War. 1979 is a midway. 1863, also a midway. Both taking us to 2014, which is also a midway. Now, if this is the French Revolution and this is American Civil War, therefore, we can also use this history as a revolution. Okay, so in 2000, we have a president as George Bush. And in 2019, we have Donald Trump. Now, these two presidents, they both cheated the system to get into president. Now, we know prophetically that George Bush is false Midas. Where false Midas, prophetically to George Bush. And we saw that, we understand that they both cheated the system. Donald Trump, using Cambridge Analytica and the help of Russia, which is both illegal. And throughout this history, as I've already stated, we have two presidents that shouldn't be there. They cheated the system. Okay, so taking us to Acts 27. In Acts 27, Sunday law is also known as the close of probation. Now, 2019 is close of probation. So at the Sunday law, we will have to recognize that there is a death and an establishment of a dictator, both of the same country. A death and a rise of a dictator. So in 2019, if we go back into history, at the end of a revolution, there is a death and a rise of a dictator. We have the sixth, and the seventh. Okay? So restrained, less restrained. Restrained and less restrained. If you go back to history, in the French Revolution, we have Napoleon. We have Napoleon. We have Napoleon and the revolutionary Robespierre. We have Abraham Lincoln in the Civil War. there was Kaiser Wilhelm in the German Revolution. Hitler and Lenin. So we can see at the Sunday Law waymark, there is a fall of a dictator and a rise and an establishment of a dictator, both of the same country, comparing it to Napoleon and Robespierre. Now, we understood that in the Sunday Law, this is the breaking of the Republican horn, making the final removal of restraint. So in 2016, (2019), we got 2021, and we have the Sunday Law waymark. So breaking of the Republican horn, Trump, restrained. Come to 2019, Trump. What happened in 2019? The impeachment, less restraint. 2021, Trump, less restrained. We have the election in 2016, we have the impeachment in 2019, and we have the January 6th riot in 2021. Come to Sunday Law, Trump, less USA, less restraint, speaks like a dragon. So we understood prophetically, as Ellen G. White always give us the end point, not the beginning. So Ellen G. White tells us that at the Sunday Law, from a lamb to the beast, the two-horned beast, we speak like a dragon. So from a lamb to the dragon, USA restraint, come to the Sunday Law, it is less restraint. Okay? The fall of a dictator, or the death of a dictator, and an establishment of a dictator. If we look at Acts 27, we have Panium as Cyprus, and then Myra as a Sunday Law. And in between those two places that they stopped, they came across Cilicia and Pamphylia. Okay? So we have here Panium, which symbolizes Cyprus, and Myra, the Sea of Cilicia and Pamphylia. And Acts 27 talks about the two institutions, the SDA and America. Okay, so we have seen through history how French Revolution, Napoleon, and Robespierre, the death of a dictator and the establishment of a dictator. If this is a revolution, if this is a civil war, which is also a revolution, therefore, we can also take this history, 9/11 to 2019, it can be symbolized as a civil war. Now, it is the process by which the government of the US, the United States, is overthrown. Now, the question that I wanted us to ask is, what happens from Penium or before Sunday law? What happens before Sunday law that gives the power to the dragon? Okay. Now, America have three branches. America has three branches. Three branches. We have the executive branch, we have the legislative branch, and we have the judicial branch. Executive consists of the president and its administration. This legislative, also known as Congress. Congress is divided into two. We have the Senate and the House of Representatives, House of Rep. So we have a lower house and an upper house. And then we have the judicial system, which consists of the courts and judges. Now let's begin with the judicial system. So the judicial system is appointed by the president. The judicial system is appointed by the president and confirmed by the Senate. So the Congress determines the shape and structure of the federal judiciary. So basically in the judicial system, they have 1 Chief Justice and 8 Associate Justices. The federal judges can only be removed. These 9 judges, we have 9 judges. 1 is the Chief Justice, and we have 8 associate judge, okay, totaling all together to 9. Now, the judges, they can be removed by impeachment from the Senate, or they serve until death or retirement. So there's 3 ways in which a federal judge, meaning the Supreme Court judges, could be removed. 1 is through impeachment, which is a conviction by the Senate. Another one is retirement or by death. So once the Supreme Court interprets the law, so the Supreme Court, they interpret the law. So once the Supreme Court interprets the law, the lower courts must apply the Supreme Court's interpretation to the fact of a particular case. Not all judges had to be present in order to hear a case. So it's a minimum of 6 judges. Minimum of 6 judges. So as of 2023, now we have 9 justice of Supreme Court. So I want to write down their names and who appointed them, the year they have been appointed, and who preceded these judges. I'll just rub this off. And we'll come back to it. Now, the main reason of our study today is to see how this lamb horn beast changes from a lamb to the beast. And we are looking at the institution in America, the three branches of America. Okay. Now we have the name. Approved by and preceded who, and the last column we have, is it either a conservative or a liberal? Because initially, these 8 judges, these 9 judges, 4 has to be liberal, 4 has to be conservative, and 1 to be neutral. So our first judge, Chief Justice John Roberts. We have John Roberts, appointed by President George Bush in the year of 2005. And he preceded William Rehnquist and is a conservative. Next, we have Justice Clarence Thomas. Clarence Thomas, appointed by George Bush, President George Bush in 1991. So he preceded Stephen Breyer, and Clarence Thomas is a conservative. Next, we have Samuel Alito, the famous name Samuel Alito that we have been hearing. Samuel Alito, appointed by George W. Bush in 2006. And preceded Sandra O'Connor, a conservative. 4, we have Sonia Sotomayor. Approved by President Barack Obama in 2009, preceded by David Soter, and is a liberal.
Presentation, in what form? On the presentation.
We have Elena, Justice Elena Kagan, approved by President Obama in 2010, preceded by John Paul Stephen and Isa, a liberal. The 6th, we have Neil Gorsuch, if I'm pronouncing that correct, approved by Donald Trump, President Donald Trump in 2017, preceded by Antonin Scalia, a conservative. 7, we have Brett Kavanaugh, hard to pronounce that name, approved by Donald Trump in 2018, preceded Anthony Kennedy, a conservative. Second last, we have Amy Coney. Yes, Amy Coney Barrett. Donald Trump in 2020, and preceded Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who is Amy being a conservative. And the very last one, we have Kentucky Brown, approved by President Joe Biden in 2021, and she's a liberal, preceded by Stephen. So we can see at the Supreme Judge, from 4 liberals and 4 conservative, 1 neutral, we have the system which exists today as 6 conservative, 3 liberals, and 6 conservative. George W. Bush had 2 terms, which is 8 years, could only appoint 3 judges in the Supreme Court. President Barack Obama, 2 terms, 8 years, 2 Supreme Court judges. Donald Trump, 1 term for only 4 years, 3 Supreme Court judge. Now, one of the judges that I want us to look at was Antonin Scalia. So Antonin Scalia died in February 2016. February 2016. So November is the president's election for United States in 2016. So in February, when Antonin Scalia died, Republicans have a majority, a supermajority in the legislative, in the Congress. President Barack Obama was in his term of choosing a new president, a new judge to precede Antonin Scalia. But the Congress the Republicans, the Senate, they hold on to the appointed judge that Barack Obama appointed until President Barack Obama went out of office, came Donald Trump. And in 2017, Donald Trump elected Neil Gorsuch. Excuse me. So we can see how the judicial system, the federal judicial system has been overturned. We have an unbalanced Supreme Court with 3 liberals and 6 conservative. So the minimum amount of judges that has to be present to for a case to be decided is 6. So they only need 6 judge, a minimum of 6 judge to be present in order for a court case to be decided. And we can see how unbalanced the court system is, the Supreme Court system. And this has been evident with some of the court cases that has been coming up. We understanding it in our Vespers class. For example, the court cases concerning Roe versus Wade, on Dobbs and Jackson, on contraceptives. We have seen how the court system have been overturned, have been unbalanced, the judicial system. Donald Trump having to choose 3 Supreme Court just in his first term of presidency. Even though Donald Trump is not in president, his legacy stays. And this is one of his legacies. The 6 versus 3 in the judicial court system. So in 2016, we have the Republicans were majority in the Senate. We had 54 Senates and 44 Democratic Senate and 54 Republican Senates. Okay, so three names. Okay? These 3 popular names: Jeff Sessions, Steve Bannon. We know who Steve Bannon is, and Stephen Miller. These 3, what can I say? 3 names, 3 people that have helped overthrow the American establishment, the overturning of the court system. Steve Bannon and Jeff Sessions. They met for the very first time in 2013 at a house party hosted by Bannon. And in this party, there was a debate on the comprehensive immigration reform. The bipartisan, the comprehensive immigration reform. Now, this reform, it provides a path to citizenship for some undocumented people. Okay? So this reform helped undocumented people get citizenship in America. And in this house party, this is where Steve Bannon and Jeff Sessions came together. They have common interests, common goals. Okay? And we understood as Steve Bannon serves as Trump's chief strategic, and Jeff Sessions as the Attorney General for Donald Trump, and he resigned in 2018. Two of the issues that they had was against immigration. They were anti-immigrants. They saw that the country voters for immigrants has gone up from 30% to 40%. And they want to change the platform of the Republican Party. So their goal is to keep America white and Christian. They saw that Trump is a vessel for their brand of republicanism. Stephen Miller is Trump's chief immigration advisor. So he's a extremist, and his goal is to restrict as much immigrants to USA as possible. Okay? So three people have I mentioned. We have Jeff Sessions, we have Steve Bannon, a very influential man, and then we have Stephen Miller. Okay, now this is the judicial system. Judicial system being overturned. I would like us to get to our next study on the legislative system. The legislative system. Legislative, also known as Congress, divided into two. We have the upper house and the lower house. The lower house as the House of Representatives, and the upper house as the Senate. Now the legislative, they are responsible for making laws, enabling laws. Now the Speaker of the House is the top official, second to Vice President, and third to the President. And they have the power to override a president's election. Now the Senate, they have a 6th term of office. So in every mid-election in America, this is an election for the Senate or the House of the midterm election are for the legislative. Federally, the country and the state. So in every midterm election, the senates that has their 6th term of office expired, these are only the senates that are going to go for re-election. Okay? It is different from the 4th term from the presidential election. Presidential election in every 4 years, we have there are only the presidents are the ones that are being competed there. Whereas in the midterm election for the Senates and the House of Rep, country as a whole or within states. So in each state is a little replica of the federal state. So what I mean by that is that America as a whole has 3 branches: the executive, the legislative, and the judicial. In every state, we have 50 states in America. So in each state They also have an executive branch, a legislative branch, and a judicial branch. They have their own Supreme Court judge. They have their own legislative branch, meaning the Congress, their own Senate, the upper house and lower house. And instead of having president as an executive, they call it the governor. They call it the governor. So we are going to look at the legislative system. One state in particular that I wanted to bring out was the state of Wisconsin. And the state of Wisconsin, the sources that I brought this information from is from the podcast of the New York Times on the runway. So state of Wisconsin, 2010. 2010 is Barack Obama's first year midterm election. Now, why I am bringing the state of Wisconsin is to explain the legislative system, bringing it down to a state level. And which is why we're looking at the state of Wisconsin. So in 2010, Scott Walker was the governor in 2010. State Walker and State Walker is a Republican. And at the same time, when Scott Walker is a Republican, a governor, the legislative also has a majority of Republican. So in both houses, they have a Republican governor and a majority of Republican in the Congress, in the legislative system. So one of the things the first thing he did as governor, this Scott Walker in 2011, he basically wanted to end the era of working with Democrats. Right? He didn't like the Democrats. So this was evident in 2011 when he effectively eliminates Act 10. So Act 10 is the collective bargaining. Now, collective bargaining, this is a process where there is a negotiation between the employees and the employers. And this negotiation is aimed at the agreement to regulate working salaries, working condition, benefits, and other aspects of workers' compensation and the rights for workers. What Scott Walker did, he effectively eliminated this collective bargaining bill for most Wisconsin public employee. Okay? So he didn't like to work with Democrats, and he wanted to have a Republican to have a lock-in power. Okay? And to do this, they'll need a map. They'll need a map. And that map made it impossible for Democrats to not just win a majority, but coming close to competing in the majority in the legislative. So this mapping system, as we have understood redistricting, is called gerrymandering. Okay? Gerrymandering is just a fancy word, a fancy term. Another word for gerrymandering, we have cheating, corruption, deceit, fraud, dishonesty, deception. There are many other names that can be replaced by gerrymandering. So gerrymandering is not a good a term. In other words, is not a good practice. So in 2011, what the state of Wisconsin did, because there was a unified between the executive branch and the legislative branch, they drew a map, and the governor of the day has the power to redraw that map, and it was a success. Because of the Wisconsin geography, it made it possible, even though Wisconsin is a 50-50 state-wide election. So the strength of the Democrat votes live in the city. In Wisconsin, the strength of the Democrats live in the city. Milwaukee, we have Madison, we have Green Bay. So what they did, they drew a map easily. They can draw a map easily that drew state assembly and state senator that packed Democratic voters into those cities in a minimal seat. So gerrymandering comes in two parts. We have the packing and we have the cracking. Okay? So what they do, they pack Democratic voters into cities to give them minimal seats, and they draw a far larger seats that covers the state's vast rural, the sub-rural, where Republicans are more likely to live. So the PAC Democratic voters has a limit to the amount of seats they have in the Senate, yeah? Rather than the urban from the rural. So the urban, which is the cities, are where the this legislative and the government, they did a redraw mapping of the voting system in order for them to get political gain. And this was evident. And this was evident. It was a success. It was a success when it came to election, the second term of election for the President Barack Obama. The Democrats win, the Electoral College won in Wisconsin for Democrats. But when it came to the lower ballot within the state, the Republican took the supermajority on the legislative system. Now the Democrats, when the legislative system, when they were redesigning this map, they were doing it in secret. They didn't do it in public or hold hearing to discuss what they were doing. They designed the map in secret and presented it for a vote. Now the Democrats, they were blindsided. They raised a lot of objection, but at the end of the day, they didn't have the vote to block it. Why? Because the Republican have a majority on the legislative system. The Democrats can protest all they want or lead the state, but they cannot do anything about it. And that map shaped democratic politics in Wisconsin. But it made it impossible for Democrats to win a majority. And it decreases the level of democracy in Wisconsin. So in 2012, as I've already stated, when the Democrats have a big success in the statewide level, when President Barack Obama was able to win in Wisconsin in the Electoral College, the Republicans have a greater ear at the down ballot level because of gerrymandering. Okay? They later realized it after 2017 when Obama was out of office. Okay? When Obama was out of office. So in 2018, they had a new governor, Tony Evers. We have Tony Evers. Tony Evers, who is a Democrat. Now, another name that I wanted to bring up is Robin Vos. Robin Vos. Robin Vos is one of the most powerful Republican in the state government of Wisconsin. So he is like the Mitch McConnell, Robin Vos. Mitch McConnell is the Senate leader of the Republic in the federal legislative branch. So Robin Vos is a very powerful, most powerful Republican in state government of Wisconsin. He's the Assembly Speaker, and he's the leader of the Republican majority in Wisconsin. He's been in office for a very long time. He's been in office for a very long time, and he was always at Scott Walker's side. For whatever Scott Walker wanted to do as government, he's always on his side. He doesn't care about public opinion. Now, before Tony Evers takes office after the November 18 election, Vos begins a series of relinquish to concentrate power for himself and Republican allies. Now, what that means, between November 18 and Tony Evers becoming governor in January, the Republican Congress, Republican legislature worked to pass a sweeping package of lame duck bill to give power to the Republican legislative. So from November, after the election, after Tony Evers' election, he will begin his time in January. So from November to January, Robin Vos had a meeting, a Republican legislative work, and this is called a lame duck bill. Now, a lame duck bill occurs whenever one Congress meets after its successor is elected, but before the successor term begins. So before Tony Evers begins in January, Robin Voss and other Republicans, they came together. They work out and pass some bills, all because to reduce the power of governor. Because now that the governor is a Democrat, and within those time before Tony Evers comes into power, Robin Voss and his colleague passed some bills, and in these bills, it is to reduce the power of the governor, to strip away some of the appointed power and spending power, and transferring them to the legislative. Because in the legislative system, there is a majority in the Republican. What's only left with the governor is the veto power. The veto power. Now, the veto power comes from the Latin word of I forbid. Now, the veto power allows the president, or here in Wisconsin, the governor, to check the legislative, to check the law, reviewing the acts that have been passed from the Congress, and blocking measures if he finds it unconstitutional, unjust, or unwise. So the veto power meaning I forbid the power that the president or the governor has to review the acts that has been passed from the legislative, if he finds it unconstitutional, unjust, or unwise. But Congress can override the veto power. Congress can override the veto power by 2/3 vote from the legislative. So we can see the difficulty that Tony Evers has. The system of gerrymandering, leaving the Republicans to always have power in the legislative branch, and the legislative branch, the Congress, have a supermajority of Republicans in Wisconsin. We're talking about the state of Wisconsin. So whatever issues that will be brought up by Tony Evers will have an impact from the Republicans. Even though that Tony Evers has the veto power, it can be override, it can be overturned by a 2/3 vote. 2/3 vote. Okay. Now, part of the state is particular the cities. I'll bring up the city of Milwaukee. Now, Milwaukee doesn't receive a lot of money to run the basic function as it would like. So this is in the state of Wisconsin. Milwaukee, the cities, they have a lot of Democrats in it. And the Milwaukee, they don't receive a lot of money to run the basic function as you would like. So what they'll do, the Milwaukee has to go hand in hand to the Republican legislative. So when I say hand in hand, they'll have to what? They'll have to humbly ask for favor they will ask respectfully in order for them to get what they want. That's what it means by hat in hand. So the Milwaukee has to go hat in hand to the Republican state legislature for things like funding to pay for city services. And one of the city services, like the police department. Now the city has to make tough choices what to fund and what not to fund. They are limited by the funds to the city. So when the crime is up in the city, in Milwaukee, those that are running the city are not able to pay for police officers. Why? Because the Congress have decided not to give or to help in the funding of more police in the Milwaukee system, in the city of Milwaukee. So what the Republican will do, excuse me, they will demonize the Democratic lawmakers. They will demonize the Democratic lawmakers because majority of the Democrats are in the city, telling them that they cannot control the high crime in the city. And they use that attack to attack Democratic lawmakers across the state. The Democrats are getting the blame for the problem, and at the same time, the Republicans who are doing that, they control the pay string for the solution. They have the solution, but they don't want to help or to give a solution to the Democrats. And not only that, they are using the evidence of the problem to help their patriarchs get elected to governor or to the Senate. The Republicans are hammering Tony Evers, who's running for Senate. And Tony Evers, as governor for Wisconsin, are getting killed through television because of the increase of crime in Milwaukee, that the Republican in the state legislature have refused to help solve. And they are using this structural reality for their political gain. Okay, so to review that again, Tony Evers, before being elected, before taking office in January, Robin Voss did some lame duck bills to strip away some of the powers that the governor can have, especially when there is a Democratic governor. But then the governor has the veto power. The veto power can only be overturned with a 2/3 vote in the legislative. And just imagine if the Republicans have a majority in the legislative or in the Congress. Whatever issues that will be brought up by the Democratic governor will be overturned because of a majority of Republicans in the legislative branch. And they are using this structure to get political gain. Now, we have seen in our VESPA studies, We have seen in our Vesper studies the right wing and the left wing, the right wing and the left wing, the right wing being a Republican and the left wing Democrats. How we had to move from the right to the left. But then when we come to the left, we have another issues there. We have to sift sources. We have the far left, and they had common grounds with those of the Republican, the far left. And one of the common grounds they have is they don't want interference to interfere with foreign policy. They always go for small government, the Republican, for small government, rather than for big government. So to summarize, we have seen earlier how at the Sunday law, there will be a death of a dictator and an establishment of a dictator. From a lamb to the beast, and restrained before Sunday law, less restrained when it comes to at the Sunday law waymark, from the 6th to the 7th. And we have seen a small portion of our study today, how the system in America, how it has been changing from a lamb to a beast. Now, as I've already stated in our earlier on, the question that we have to ask, what happens from Penium to Sunday law that gives Republican the power? Right? We have seen an overturning of the judicial system. We have seen a small illustration of the state of Wisconsin, the power that the legislative system have if there is a supermajority of the Republican Party. Yes. That ends our study for today. If anyone wants to give a thought, ask a question before we end with a prayer. Thank you, Lynn. Anyone wants to ask a question regarding our study for today?
I'll make a comment if you like, not really a question. It's just amazing how a democratic country, democratic in inverted commas, can go from that they would allow something like this to happen. But obviously, it's happening.
Yes. Yes. Thank you. Thank you, Greg, for that comment. Yes, and we can see it happening. Okay, so let us bow our heads in prayer. Dear God in heaven, we thank you for today. We thank you for this movement. We thank you for our elders, for the knowledge that you have given them in this movement. We thank you for your patience and your love. And I pray that we will be willing to learn and unlearn in order for us to get salvation. We ask for your Holy Spirit to help us recognize what is happening externally, because what is happening externally will impact us internally as we are at the agitation of the Sunday law. I pray for our next speaker, that you may bless each and every one of us in our study for today. Thank you again for this hour and for the lives of the members that are able to tune in into our Zoom platform this Sabbath morning. In Jesus' name we pray, amen.